Good morning, Year 5, and welcome back to Lesson 12 of Destination Reader. We're going to continue reading Matilda by Roald Dahl. By now, you should be familiar with the key words, which are in red, questions for you to answer, which are in blue, and writing time, which is in green. We're going to continue with strategy number 3 today, inference. Remember, inference means to read between the lines. I would like you to remind yourself why good readers make inferences. Make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. Press play once you are ready to continue. Well done. Good readers make inferences to help them understand the text more. Left out information makes the reader want to keep on reading to find out more. Let's have a look at our vocabulary for today. Intrigue. Intrigue. If something intrigues you, it interests you. You want to know more about it. Simper. Simper, which means to smile in a rather silly way. Delinquent. Delinquent. Usually a young person who repeatedly commits minor crimes. That's what a delinquent is. Have a look out for these words as we read today. Let's recap the kind of answers that some of our questions need. I would like you to think about what kind of answer a 1-mark question needs. Say your answer out loud now. Well done. It needs a short, snappy answer. Now have a think about what kind of answer a 2-mark question needs. Say your answer out loud now. Brilliant. 2-mark questions need a PE answer, point and evidence. You're going to have a think of what kind of answer a 3-mark question needs. We introduced 3-mark questions yesterday. I'd like you to say your answer out loud and then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. Press play once you are ready to continue. Great work, Year 5. 3-mark questions need a PEE answer. That is, point, evidence, and explanation. Remember, your point is your main idea that you want to talk about. Your evidence is where you prove your point using a quotation from the text. And your explanation is where you explain why you have made the point and how the quotation backs up your point. Let's continue reading. We're on page 89 now, and we're continuing to read the chapter, The Parents. I will read and you will follow along. We'll stop at certain points to give you time to make inferences. How do you do, Mrs. Wormwood? Mrs. Wormwood glared at her and said, What's the trouble then? Nobody invited Miss Honey to sit down, so she chose a chair and sat down anyway. This, she said, was your daughter's first day at school. We know that, Mrs. Wormwood said, ratty about missing her programme. Is that all you came to tell us? Miss Honey stared hard into the woman's wet grey eyes, and she allowed the silence to hang in the air until Mrs. Wormwood became uncomfortable. Do you wish me to explain why I came? She said. Get on with it then, Mrs. Wormwood said. I'm going to stop. My question is, how can we infer that the situation Miss Honey has put herself in is awkward? for 2 marks. I would like you to say your answer out loud and then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. Press play once you are ready. Let's have a look at my answer. We can infer that the situation Miss Honey has put herself in is awkward because it says she allowed the silence to hang in the air. The fact that it is silent means the characters are waiting uncomfortably for the next person to speak. Okay, so I've got my point, which is that the situation is awkward, and I've got my evidence, which shows why I think that the situation is awkward. I have also explained you don't need to have an explanation, but to make my answer flow correctly, I added an explanation. Well done. Let's continue. I'm sure you know, Miss Honey said, that children in the bottom class at school are not expected to be able to read or spell or juggle with numbers when they first arrive. 5-year-olds cannot do that, but Matilda can do it all. And if I am to believe her, I wouldn't, Mrs. Wormwood said. She was still ratty at losing the sound on the TV. Was she lying then? Miss Honey said. When she told me that nobody had taught her to multiply or to read, did either of you teach her? Teach her what? Mr. Wormwood said. To read books, Miss Honey said. Perhaps you did teach her. Perhaps she was lying. Perhaps you have shelves full of books all over the house. I wouldn't know. Perhaps you are both great teachers. Both great readers. Of course we read, Mr. Wormwood said. Don't be so daft. I read the autocar and the motor from cover to cover every week. This child has already read an astonishing number of books, Miss Honey said. I was simply trying to find out if she came from a family that loved good literature. We don't hold with book reading, Mr. Wormwood said. You can't make a living from sitting on your family and reading storybooks. We don't keep them in the house. I see, Miss Honey said. Well, all I came to tell you was that Matilda has a brilliant mind, but I expect you knew that already. Of course I knew she could read, the mother said. She spends her life in her room buried in some silly books. But does it not intrigue you? Miss Honey said, so she's asking Miss Wormwood if it fascinates her, if she wants to know more and find out more about why Matilda is like this. That a little 5-year-old child is reading long adult novels by Dickens and Hemingway. Doesn't that make you jump up and down with excitement? Not particularly, the mother said. I'm not in favour of blue stocking girls. A girl should think about making herself look attractive so she can get a good husband later on. Looks is more important than books, Miss Hunky. My name is Miss Honey, Miss Honey said. We're going to stop so we can answer another question. Why does Roald Dahl want the reader to dislike Matilda's parents? This question is worth 3 marks. What 3 things is your answer going to need? I would like you to say your answer out loud and then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. Press play once you are ready. Well done. I think that Roald Dahl wants the reader to dislike Matilda's parents because they do not behave in a way that parents should according to the story. This is shown when Mrs. Wormwood says she spends her life up in her room, buried in some silly book. Mrs. Wormwood's use of the word silly suggests that she does not think that Matilda should be spending her time reading books to educate herself. In my answer, I've made my main point using the words I think that. I've used because to explain what I think. And I've used my quotation from the book, she spends her life up in the room buried in some silly book. My last sentence explains how this backs up my main point and what it suggests. Well done for having an attempt at that question. Let's continue. Now look at me, Mrs. Wormwood said. Then look at you. You choose books, I choose looks. Miss Honey looked at the plain, plump person with the smug sweat pudding face who was sitting across the room. What did you say? She asked. I said you chose books and I chose looks, Mrs. Wormwood said. And who's finished up the better off? Me, of course. I'm sitting pretty in a nice house with a successful businessman, and you're left slaving away teaching a lot of nasty little children the ABC. Quite right, Sugarplum, Mr. Wormwood said, casting a look of such simpering sloppiness at his wife it would have made a cat sick. Miss Honey decided that if she was going to get anywhere with these people, she must not lose her temper. I haven't told you all of it yet, she said. Matilda, so far as I can gather, at this early stage is also a kind of mathematical genius. She can multiply complicated figures in her head like lightning. What's the point of that when you can buy a calculator? Mr. Wormwood said. A girl doesn't get a man by being brainy, Mrs. Wormwood said. Look at that film star, for instance, she added, pointing at the silent TV screen, where a bosomy female was being embraced by a craggy actor in the moonlight. You don't think she got him to do that by multiplying figures at him, do you? Not likely. And now he's going to marry her. You see if he doesn't, and she's going to live in a mansion with a butler and lots of maids. Miss Honey could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had heard parents like this existed all over the place, and that their pet children turned out to be delinquents and dropouts, but it was still a shock to meet a pair of them in the flesh. Remember our key word, delinquents. Remind yourself of what it means. Matilda's trouble, she said, trying once again, is that she is so far ahead of everyone else around her that it might be worth thinking about some extra kind of private tuition. I seriously believe that she could be brought up to university standard in 2 or 3 years with the proper coaching. University? Mr. Wormwood shouted, bouncing up in his chair. Who wants to go to university, for heaven's sake? All they learn there is bad habits. That is not true, Miss Honey said. If you had a heart attack this minute and had to call a doctor, that doctor would be a university graduate. If you got sued for selling someone a rotten second-hand car, you'd have to get a lawyer, and he'd be a university graduate too. Do not despise clever people, Mr. Wormwood. But I see we're not going to agree. I'm sorry I burst in on you like this. Miss Honey rose from her chair and walked out of the room. Before we finish off the chapter, we're going to stop for one last question. How do you think Miss Honey might be feeling after her conversation with the Wormwoods? For 3 marks. My answer is going to need to have a point, a piece of evidence, and an explanation. Say your answer out loud, and then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. Press play once you are ready. I think that Miss Honey might be feeling disheartened after her conversation with the Wormwoods, because she says, I can see we're not going to agree, before walking out of the room to leave. This suggests that Miss Honey has given up trying to convince Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood how much potential Matilda has, although we know that Miss Honey was determined to change the Wormwoods' mindset about Matilda. I've used my main point that I think Miss Honey is feeling disheartened. I've used evidence where she says that she can see they're not going to agree to back up my main point. And then I've also explained what that suggests. The fact that she has said that they're not going to agree and she walks out suggests that she has given up trying to convince the parents. Let's read the last section. Mr. Wormwood followed her to the front door and said, Good of you to come, Miss Hawkes, or is it Miss Harris? It's neither, Miss Honey said. But let it go. And away she went. I really enjoyed reading that chapter. Tomorrow we will continue reading and carry on making inferences. We're going to continue to practice answering 3-mark questions all week. On your piece of paper or in your home learning book, make a list of the reasons why Matilda's parents are different to other parents.